Welcome to EWTN News live coverage of Pope Francis in the United States. And we welcome all of our viewers around the world and domestically. I'm Raymond Arroyo. In a few moments, we'll bring you the Pope's welcome ceremony with President Obama at the White House. It is an exciting day here in the nation's capital. Joining me for our continuing coverage of the Pope's visit, listen to me, the Pope's visit to the United States is the Papal Posse. Robert Royal, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Father Gerald Murray of the Archdiocese of New York, and a very special addition this morning, Monsignor Christopher Nolte of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Thank you all for being here. Great to have you aboard, Monsignor, and my venerable posse.
Great to be here.
It is exciting. I mean, the city is a bit hollowed out here near Capitol Hill. But the kids are off of school. There's a jubilation in the air. People are really excited. It is a gorgeous day. As you can see, I'm going to share this video with you. This is an image from the Nunciature. Now, this is the Pope's representative here in Washington, the embassy, if you will, of the Holy See. Now, there have been a lot of, how to put this, misreporting this morning. I've been watching some of the morning shows. I watched television last night as I went to bed. There is so much misunderstanding surrounding this visit, who the Pope is, why he is here. We're gonna clear up a lot of that for you today. Starting with that flag. Tell us about we see the yellow and white flag. I heard a major anchor this morning say, look, it's the United States flag flanked by the Pope's flag. Well, it's not entirely true. Robert Royal?
Yeah, it's the flag of the Holy See, which is a nation. It's a small nation, but it's a nation just like the United States and Italy and France are nations as well. So the Pope Pope has a personal seal. He has his own shield, and he's got this quotation on it. He had mercy on him and chose him. That is very dear to his heart. Mm-hmm. But that's his personal expression of who he is, the public expression. The flag is there. It's like the American flag. Whoever's president, that's the flag of the country.
And you see, excuse me, you see outside the Nunciature, this is the front steps. The Pope will be coming out in a moment. He'll get in the Pope mobile. And there are about 300 school children who are packed into what's kind of the front garden of the Nunciature. Did you work at the Nunciature here?
No, just in Rome.
But you were in Rome. You were in the
Congregation
clergy.
for the Clergy.
Yeah,
Right.
Congregation for Clergy. What do you think, looking in on this? How would you put this in context, what you've seen today?
Well, you know, this is where the Pope stays, right? He doesn't stay in a hotel. He doesn't stay in a monastery. He stays with his representative here in the United States. And so the Apostolic Nuncio is sent here to be the Pope's representative. So it'd be the natural place for him to stay. I heard on some of the news reports they called it a hotel or they called it a palace. It's if you go down Embassy Row in Washington, you see all the different embassies, and a nunciature is like an embassy. It has the representatives of a government who are sent here to help relations between states. So the nuncio in Rome is here to help relationships.
And Father Jerry Murray, the Pope also, when he's in New York, he'll also be staying there at the UN mission.
That's right. Archbishop Bernardita Auza is the papal nuncio at the UN, and his residence is up on the east side, 72nd Street. And yeah, it's a nice brownstone building that was given to the Archdiocese of New York by a successful family in the past, and it's used for that purpose. And they fixed it up a little bit to make sure it's all clean and proper, but yeah, that's where he will stay with the representative at the UN.
Yes, and this is, we should just say, this is it's an elegant place, it's beautiful, but it is hardly lavish. It's not a palace at all. I mean, anybody who's been inside,
right.
In fact, you know, the wallpaper could probably use a refreshing. I mean, it's, you know, it's humble in its... Right. You know, it was built probably in the 50s.
And most of the rooms for all the popes are like that. I stayed, when I went to visit a classmate of mine in Detroit, I stayed at the Archbishop's residence, and I stayed in the room where the Pope had stayed when he was there. And it was a nice room, but it wasn't anything opulent.
We are getting video here, the Fiat, the papal Fiat, which is the Pope mobile for this visit. We're used to that
Fiat Cinquecento.
That's right. We're used to that big hulking, you know, white thing with the plexiglass bubble around it. That is not what the Pope will be traveling in today. He's in this Fiat. The Pope mobile itself will have its day. I hear it's a white Jeep Wrangler that's been kind of tricked out. We will see that I expect during the parade, there is going to be a parade on the ellipse at the White House. Now, let me run you down while we have a moment. I'll give you a rundown of what we're planning in the moments ahead. Pope Francis is welcome and meeting with the President of the United States, Barack Obama. That will follow. He'll leave the Nunciature here, go to the White House. He'll have a big welcoming ceremony. There are formal remarks, which you will hear. We will bring them to you live as they happen. And then there'll be an open motorcade past the National Mall, around the ellipse, and there are thousands and thousands of people. You didn't need a ticket for that parade, so they have been waiting, some of them overnight, to see the Holy Father there. Then we'll bring you to Pope Francis's meeting with his bishops, the bishops of the U.S. at St. Matthew's Cathedral. And later this afternoon, after a little break, the Pope will go to Catholic University, where he will have a Mass and the first canonization on American soil. He will make Junipero Serra a saint. And you can see that as it happens. We are on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can go to our Facebook page at EWTN. You can also send us an email at papalvisit@ewtn.com. It's a great way to throw your questions at us, and we can answer some of this, or at least try, given the, I think, the gross misunderstandings. And as we read through these addresses, there is going to be a lot to discuss, and frankly, I think we're going to see a lot of shoddy reporting in the days to come as well.
Well, that's why we're here. I mean, we try to give accurate, Catholic-informed commentary, and certainly this Pope, with his spontaneity, with his, he likes to be informal. We're going to look out to see if he makes off-the-cuff remarks, off-the-script remarks. We're also going to see what he does in English or Spanish, which is going to be interesting. Yeah. So we'll be ready for both.
Yeah, well, it looks like, I believe this opening address is going to be in English, I think. The Mass this afternoon is entirely in Spanish. The entire homily will be in Spanish. Only 4 of these addresses are in English, which is kind of extraordinary for a Pope coming to a land.
Well, you know, we do have multilingual culture here in the U.S., so I don't think it's unfair for him to speak in Spanish, especially where he's comfortable doing it. Obviously, with a country with a national language, you'd like if you could hear all of it in your native language, but I don't think it's unfair for, you know, we even in our diocese have masses, and a lot of the parts are in Spanish or Vietnamese, according to the people. So, and if it's a language he's comfortable with, I'd like to hear him in it.
Yeah, well, and 40%, as we discovered as we started looking into this, 40% of the Catholic population in the United States is Hispanic. Right. Now, whether they're all Hispanic speakers is a different issue, but there is a sizable part of the Catholic faith where Spanish is spoken.
Yeah, and I think that he wants to stick perhaps to Spanish and Italian, which he's also been using, because he wants to be careful about
there's
what
Pope
he says.
Francis stepping out of the Nunciature. He'll likely go greet the children before he gets in the Pope Mobile, starting a very arduous day here in the nation's capital. Of course, great excitement. These are all Catholic school kids, by the way. In fact, our producer, Christina, one of her children are in this throng. Everybody's got their cameras out, taking their selfies. Look, snap the picture, snap the picture. They're all
The Pope looks well rested, I'll say.
He does.
He does.
He's smiling. Look at that. That's
no,
wonderful.
that's a sweet moment. He's reaching out to all the kids, straining over the barricades, trying to talk to them, trying to talk to the Holy Father.
And it is characteristic of this Pope is that he does like to mix into the crowds more than some of the other popes does.
Oh.
It's characteristic of his audiences and his other appearances.
Now, that fellow there is a teacher of the Heights, the man who embraced him.
Oh.
Who kissed him?
Yeah, who kissed him.
On the face.
Yeah, yeah.
What about the ring?
And security moved in very fast.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they're only back off. The Heights is a Catholic school here in D.C. And some of the Heights kids are there, and other parochial schools throughout the area. Pope taking his time.
That's good. That's good. Look at that. What a thrill for these kids.
We learned after we went off the air last night that the Pope's plane had to circle several times in North Carolina because the president was late to the meeting on the tarmac at Andrews. So
well, he won't be late for this one since they're going to his house.
They're going to his house. Yeah.
You know, one of my friends who's a pilot sent me. He was watching the Pope's plane on Flight Tracker, which tracks all flights around the U.S. and saw the thing doing loops to loops over North Carolina and said, "What's going on here?" It turned out he had to slow the plane down a little bit so the president could get there on time. That's Beltway traffic for you.
That's right. Well, When the president's late, you
Right.
keep circling. The
Well,
Pope's
you know,
making-
the downtown is closed today, though. You
That's
know,
right.
all the federal workers are home. I mean, we didn't even have to look both ways before we crossed the street coming over here.
Look at the Pope taking his time with so many of these kids along the route, really enjoying this look, enjoying this moment. You know, this is when Pope Francis is really in his element and at his best, when he's interacting one-on-one. But you can see the Vatican security here. They're a little trepidatious about the touching, the grabbing, the feeling. They're really inserting themselves in a way that they normally don't. Look at the little boy, little girl hugging him, touching his face. Secret Service is all around. Boy, are they are on. I've frankly never seen this
A
tight
cocoon like
security.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
normally
bright-
they give him a lot of
Right.
space. Not here. And look, this is warranted. No one wants anything to happen. And this is, you are watching, the largest security operation ever in the history of the United States to protect one person in multiple cities at the same time.
The man directly behind him is a Swiss Guard. If I can mention this again, Raymond, I wrote a book about the history of the Swiss Guard
Did you
for their
really?
500th anniversary.
I remember that. It was
In
an
case you
excellent
don't
book.
remember, I'm trying to remind you right
Yes.
now. And interestingly, when the Pope travels inside Rome, for example, when he goes out to St. John Lateran or some other venue, there are actually 3 layers of security. The Swiss Guards are right around him, and they are ultimately the ones who are going to
Responsible.
have to give up their lives if he's attacked. Then there's the Vatican Gendarmeria, it's called. That's their security force. Then on the outside, there's often the Italian Secret Service, who are very heavily armed. They all look like James Bond, very handsome $5,000 suits, and the Uzis
Bella
tucked
figura.
away beautifully inside the jackets.
Wow, the Pope is really taking his time here, and what a thrill for those kids.
No, he's really working the whole line here, and it's neat to see all the kids in their uniforms and their prep school ties, and of course also a reflection of the generation. Had we seen this scene 10 years ago, you wouldn't see one cell phone.
Right.
Now every kid comes with one, and everyone demands a picture. Look, they're all turning back to get their selfies. Hilarious.
And you know,
with the
you saw
Pope.
that when he was elected. When Pope Benedict was elected, you did not have cell phone cameras.
That's right.
When Pope Francis was elected, I took a picture from the back of the crowd, and all you see in hands are cell phones pointing up toward
And
the balcony.
iPads. I was behind a bunch of iPads that
Right.
day, and it was hard to see the Pope.
And we are awaiting the Pope's departure from the Nunciature. This is the Vatican Embassy in D.C. He will then proceed to the White House for this much-anticipated meeting with President Barack Obama. The formal welcome when he arrived yesterday, when we brought you that landing at Andrews Air Force Base, that was really just a landing and an arrival. There were no formal remarks. There was no official greeting. Today, that will happen in grand style. 20,000 plus packed onto the south lawn of the White House. We're going to bring you all of that as it happens, the festivities, the music, everything. Pope Francis now getting in that Fiat, I believe. So he walked the length of the driveway. He kind of started at one end of
then
the
they
front
brought the car
driveway.
down to
yeah,
him.
and he walked down to the car. The Pope has there are many, now there are children who are coming forward to greet him and I guess present him with some gifts, which is customary.
I don't know that in all the times that I've been around popes, I've seen so many adults give him the double kiss on the face as he did in that line. I
Right.
mean, usually you're reaching for his ring. You know, people want to kiss the Holy Father's ring as a sign of submission to the Holy Father. It's kind of a new equality in a sense that instead of reverencing the Pope, they're embracing him like they would a friend, and he's accepting it. You know, I mean, in the past, I'm not sure. St. Pius X would have been going through the crowd and doing the bacio mano. I mean, the bacio, the face. You know, as
Right,
much
no,
as this.
that would not be done. But this, the Pope is an informal man, and his attitude is very grandfatherly.
Right, right. I think you're
There is a
right.
lot of security here. I have to tell you, this is like the Praetorian Guard surrounding him. It is. I've never seen a net of Secret Service and Vatican security as we're seeing here. Wow.
Yes, well, it's very important because we do live under these threats from ISIS and other terrorists, and we know what a terrible thing that would be if something happened.
I'm going to cut away for a moment. We will continue to double box this. You can watch the Pope's departure. We are going to take you now to EWTN News' Catherine Seltner is standing by at the White House. Catherine, what are you hearing, and what do we expect to see today? What are people telling you there on the venue?
Raymond, yes, good morning. I've been here early. There was a long security line, and it's an exciting day. In just a few minutes, Pope Francis will arrive here, his first visit to the White House, not his first meeting with President Barack Obama. And when he gets here, there will be a red carpet rolled out for him with President Obama and the First Lady waiting. That's typical in meeting with heads of states. Then the national anthem of the Holy See will play, followed by the national anthem of the United States of America. The two world leaders will then head on into the South Lawn. President Barack Obama, as you mentioned, will make a few remarks. The official welcoming, Pope Francis will follow, briefly speaking. Then the two will head into the White House for their private meeting. The next time we'll see them, they'll appear onto the balcony, waving to the crowd. 15,000 are expected to pack, maybe more, as you mentioned, 20,000. Massive crowd here. Now, of course, the last time a Pope visited the White House was Pope Benedict XVI back in 2008 with his meeting with President Bush. And at the time, it was his 81st birthday. So the South Lawn broke out singing into Happy Birthday for our pontiff. Now today, the entire visit, the entire meeting is about 90 minutes. All this pomp and protocol for about an hour and a half. But the 48 hours Pope Francis spends in D.C. will be the most time he spends in any U.S. city this entire week. It is sure to be a memorable visit. Of course, we have continued coverage right here on EWTN. Raymond?
Very good. Thank you, Catherine, and we will catch up with you later. You're seeing the motorcade make its way down an abandoned Massachusetts Avenue. You cannot travel Massachusetts Avenue. It is shut down. And
Usually at this time of day it's shut down, but it's because there's so much traffic.
Right. This is true. So you see the motorcade making its way down Mass Ave, and the excitement of the people there on site. I've been getting some emails. That was that fellow who embraced the Pope. His name is Jeff Thompson, and he's a teacher of religion actually at the Heights, and was very moved, I think, by that moment, and excited. He put he had the both double fists to the sky.
He's lucky he didn't get wrestled at the ground.
I had the same thought when I saw the Secret Service push in. You kind of you do take pause. I have to get into some comments, and again, we want to paint the full picture for you here. Last night, as the Holy Father, or yesterday afternoon, as he made his way from Cuba to the United States, he went to the back of the plane and he was questioned by journalists. And some of the questions raised were, Holy Father, you are perceived as being a man of the left. One of the reporters asked him, and he had this to say. We'll roll some of that video for you. If I have given the impression of being a bit of a lefty, that would be an error in the explanation. My doctrine on all of this, from Laudato Si, his encyclical on the environment, to economic imperialism and all that, is that of the social doctrine of the Church. And if it is necessary for me to recite the creed, I'm willing to do it. What do you hear there?
Well, look, this is exactly true. I was on National Public Radio yesterday, and they played a clip of an interview they did with me last year when I said he will not change the doctrine on gays, on abortion, etc. And they wanted me to admit that, in fact, he's changing everything. Well, I made clear to them, we can see the way that he views the environmental question, for example, or the way he may look at inequality or immigration or the international economic system. Those particulars you could debate. That the Church has not only the capacity but the responsibility to address every human thing that is connected with God, with the faith, with morality, is beyond question. So he's affirmed here that he is primarily adhering to Catholic principle. In terms of individual judgments, you may agree or disagree with where he comes out.
Now, this is a major point that I really, we can't underscore this enough, because you're going to hear a lot of spin, particularly after these opening remarks. I'm just telling you, okay? One of the things you're going to hear is the Pope is saying this is doctrine now. You must do that. Distinguish, Father Murray, and then I want to get Monsignor Nolte to take a crack at this. The difference between prudential judgment and established faith and morals. Church teaching.
The teaching of the Church, as contained in the Catechism and the official doctrines and dogmas of the faith, that's something we must believe in. The application of those principles when it comes to particular questions of the moment, that's where you get into the area of prudential judgment and discussion. Another thing we have to throw into that is the Holy See, as an international juridical institution, has certain interests that it proposes. So, for instance, the Holy See is in favor of ending the U.S. economic embargo against Cuba. That is a particular political point of view that the Holy See has stuck to through a number of popes. If a Catholic or anyone disagrees with that, they're not doing anything wrong. You can disagree. Now, you should always argue from principle and reason. And in these matters, it's debatable. And that's something that sometimes Catholics don't understand. Sometimes they say, well, if the Pope is for it, I guess I have to be. Yeah. Let's remember, John Paul II, who's a saint now, he was against the first Gulf War. When the United States went to liberate Kuwait, he was against that war being fought. On the other hand, he was in favor of saving Croatia from the invasion by the Serbians. The Holy See does adopt positions. We can support them or not when it comes to prudential questions. But as regards, and when Pope speaks about the creed, if you don't accept the creed, that's where the problem comes up.
Yeah. And I think it's a difficulty using terms like right and left as it applies to the Pope. These are political divisions that people have particular interests. On one hand, the Church is the most conservative organization in the world in the sense that it conserves the doctrine that was taught to us by Jesus Christ for future generations. On the other hand, we're called to have an open hand to the poor, so in some ways we could be considered the most liberal organization in the world. And so the standard traditional divisions in politics don't really apply to the Holy Father. But I think he was saying that his encyclical follows in terms of other encyclicals from Rere Novarum to Pacem in Terris, talking about us being custodians of our world as given to us by God in Genesis. And the bulk of his encyclical is about the theology. He mentions some problems that he sees in the world. He mentions the theology, and then he applies it. Now, you can be, just like there are cafeteria Catholics, right, that walk down the cafeteria line of Catholic teachings. I want to take some of the ice cream and and I want some of that good soup, but I don't want the mustard greens and I don't want the broccoli. The secular world kind of does that with this Pope. It goes down his teachings and takes and chooses the things that he says to the exclusion of ones they don't like, right? Yeah. So they'll pick up something he says that may support their agenda on the environment. Oh, but we won't say anything about his respect for life and his teachings on sexual morality. Yeah. Right?
Well, they lose the context, and I think without the larger bubble, without the context of this, it doesn't make sense.
No, and it's good that he put this out there very early on because he knows that people are going to try to politicize what he's doing, and it's very clear if you talk to secular journalists, if you talk to secular commentators who don't understand this distinction that we all understand very clearly between prudential judgments and church principles, that they regard any change that he introduces, they've created this narrative already, of course, but they regard any change that he introduces now, whether it's on a minor, it is refashioning the entire
remaking the church in a progressive vein. I mean, I heard that on a morning show this morning. The progressive Pope comes to bring his agenda of transformation to the United States. Wait a minute. Yeah. This is a call to mercy, a call of salvation. That is the, he wasn't elected by anybody in the public. He was elected by cardinals to advance the church and its salvific mission to save souls, not to become the endorsement machine for the Republican or the Democratic Party.
We actually have two quotations from him now. One in an interview he gave to Civiltà Cattolica very early after he was elected, in which he said, "I was never a right-winger." Meaning in Argentina and in the church. But then again, now we have this, I'm not, some people are calling me a lefty, but if you people in the media actually look carefully at what I do, what I say, how I act, you'd recognize that that's not accurate. And you have a responsibility to report accurately on me so that people understand who I am and what the church teaches.
That's what he means when he says, I'll recite the creed. It's not, I'm not a lefty or a righty, as you say. I'm a Catholic, okay? And I'm the Holy Father that I've been charged as the successor of Peter to bring back and to promote the message of Christ.
Yes, but we do have to recognize that he has said some things that his predecessors have not said. You know, about climate change. No, the media is not getting everything wrong.
Right.
But the Pope himself, in the encyclical, says he's not here to settle scientific questions. He said in the airplane back from Paraguay that he has to learn more about economics because he's allergic to it, and his experience is such. The Pope doesn't mind when you get into a debate. Now, one way you get into a debate is recognize sincerity and accuracy in presentation of positions. I think that's what the media needs to do.
We are going to double box it. I want you to see these shots of the White House. You can see the famous Truman balcony there in the distance, all decked out, all awaiting the arrival of Pope Francis. And any moment he will be driving up. And he'll come straight, actually, it appears as if they'll drive the Pope-mobile right behind that, where that podium's set up in the front. There's a driveway. And he will make his way there momentarily. We will bring it to you live. This is EWTN News live coverage of Pope Francis being welcomed at the White House. Father Gerald Murray, Robert Royal, and Monsignor Christopher Nolte all in the house with me, and we're delighted that you've joined us. You can send your questions to papalvisit@ewtn.com. You can find me on Twitter, send questions there as well. I want to share another little bit from this airplane press conference yesterday. The Pope was talking about what he actually might advance while here specifically. He said, "My wish is to get a good final result, to get an agreement that could satisfy both parties, an agreement." I think he's talking here about the Cuban-U.S. embargo business. As far as the position of the Holy See is concerned on the embargoes, previous popes have talked about this, and not only about this, but about all the cases of embargoes. There is a social doctrine in the Church, and I follow it, which is very detailed. Then previewing what he might talk about, he says, "I will talk not specifically on this topic of the U.S. embargo on Cuba, but rather in general, the topic of bilateral and multilateral international agreements as a sign of progress for coexistence. I will approach the topic from this angle, but if I remember correctly, this specific topic will not be mentioned." Your reaction?
Well, embargoes are complicated. In fact, most embargoes don't work. You know, we've had histories of embargoes in the last century or so for a variety of reasons in various countries. For me, the interesting thing here, having lived here in Washington for 30 years, is that there's great confidence and valuing of these international or bilateral negotiations. And when you can negotiate, I mean, it's a wonderful thing. We are rational beings. When we speak rationally with one another to arrive at rational conclusions, that's wonderful. But I have to think that in terms of the United States and Cuba, while the Castro regime, that highly repressive regime, is still in place in Cuba, it's going to be very difficult to move forward in lifting an embargo. And I don't know why entirely the United States should be in favor of that, because at least in some ways it keeps some pressure on a regime that represses its own people and causes mischief in actual fact as well as in the way it speaks around the world.
As they did yesterday at the meeting, when the Holy Father had personally invited some of the people who are dissidents in their own country, who disapprove of the current regime that has decimated the economy of their country for years, while enriching some of the members of the government, and they were invited by the Holy Father and then were prohibited from going, were arrested and pulled away from the papal mass.
You can't even talk with the Pope in a place like Cuba.
Right.
Yeah, no, this is an example where the Pope, his prudential judgment is such. Others can disagree. They're not bad Catholics if they don't agree with this.
You mean this advocacy for international agreements?
For an agreement to end the embargo between Cuba and the United States. On the other hand, I'm glad he used the word agreement, because precisely we should get something as the United States. If we are going to lift an embargo, let's get rights for labor unions. Let's get protections for the environment there. Let's get all the kind of things that are usually talked about in relation to how we run our own economy down in Cuba.
You know, it was striking watching the Pope in Cuba, because there was a restraint. There was an unwillingness to kind of offer specific policy solutions to what ails the Cuban people and the long reign of suppression that has dominated that island nation for decades. It seems, if these comments on the plane are any indication, that the Pope means and will be much more specific in the way he addresses policy and the overarching morality that surrounds it in the United States. Yes, no,
yeah,
disagree?
I think you're right.
I
Yeah,
think
and
it needs-
it's easy to put it this way. It's in a free society, it's easy to be blunt. In a communist society, you have to be careful, and I respect the Pope doing it that way.
But I think what he wants to focus on is the centrality of individual human beings made in the image and likeness of God. And so I think all of his doctrine, all of his speeches and his comments really have that at its core, is that we individually are made in the image and likeness of God, and we have a destiny in this life and in the life to come. And so when it regards human life issues, whether it's capital punishment or whether it's abortion, where it concerns living conditions for human beings, then it gets into the environment. When it concerns lack of freedom in oppressive regimes, then it all interferes with the individual, the likeness of God that we all are, and the call that Jesus came to save us and participate in that.
Speaking of individuals, and Monsignor just raised this, one other quote I want to share with you. He talked about life imprisonment. This came up. Now, this is a comment that will no doubt rub some people the wrong way. The Pope said, life imprisonment is almost a hidden death penalty. I've already said this publicly in a speech to European jurists. You are there, and you are dying every day without any hope of freedom.
True in a way, but also I think this is one of those prudential judgments that simply in society there are people who cannot be allowed to walk free in society without grave damage to other persons, and to just the idea of the rule of law and the way that a government's first responsibility is to protect the people. The Holy See, in line with much of what goes on in Europe, has for years been trying to eliminate the death penalty. It's much stronger there than as a movement than it is here. And we can understand that even John Paul II has said that to protect society, if he made a point of specifying that, to protect society, it is almost never necessary any longer to use the death penalty. Well, if we're going to say that, then life imprisonment for particularly heinous crimes, for persons who we cannot allow to live among us, it's maybe sad, but it's a sad necessity.
We should also, while we're here, we should talk for a moment, because the Pope is going to be visiting a prison in Philadelphia. We'll be bringing that to you. I believe that's Sunday. I think it's the last day of his visit. This notion of reforming the imprisonment system, our judicial system, and the way we engage prisoners, this has been a big part of his public message, mostly in Europe. It's the first time I think we're going to hear it in this full-throated way in the United States. The Pope has also spoken about against the death penalty. He's not a fan. John Paul wasn't a fan. Benedict wasn't a fan either. However, the door is not entirely closed on this issue, given church teaching.
Sure.
Explain. Make the distinction.
No, the question is it immoral to use capital punishment? And the answer is no, it's not immoral given the proper circumstances, the nature of a grave crime, etc., the need to protect society. Is it merciful not to impose it? That's another question, and that's where we have, for instance, heads of state will give a pardon to someone. But no, there's a lot of confusion saying the Catholic Church is against the death penalty. We're not saying it's immoral. On the other hand, it's definitely...
The Catholic Church is pro-human life.
Yes.
And sometimes the death penalty is used to protect other human beings from someone who is capable of destroying
or to vindicate
human life.
justice, too.
Yeah, Cardinal Avery Dulles had that great article he wrote many years ago. He spoke about this several times, too, where in his estimation, he said, you know, there are times where the death penalty can be an act of mercy.
Absolutely.
Because it gives this individual, if the Church's vision is to redeem the soul of an individual, to point them to eternal life, it gives them a short window to determine, okay, I have to make my peace with God, beg forgiveness, and this is the time to do that. Interesting. The President of the United States now making his way out to this South Lawn welcome of Pope Francis. We take you there now live. This is EWTN, live continuing coverage of Pope Francis in America. First Lady and President Obama are standing at attention awaiting the papal fiat.
We can hear the crowds cheering in the distance, so we know that Pope Francis is quite close. see the President and the First Lady?
This is direct from the White House. The President of the United States is waiting for Pope Francis. The protocol demands that he be received by President Obama right in front of the White House. And the President and the First Lady were present yesterday when the plane landed at the airport.
We'll bring Anita in. You see Pope Francis making his way out of the papal fiat, now greeting President Obama and the First Lady.
Who's that with him there? Secretary. I don't know the name.
He's talking about his arrival in the car, the Cinquecento. It's funny they're mentioning that on Italian radio. You know, that's a post-World War II car, an economy car. It's been upgraded for the U.S. market, but it has its traditions in post-war Italy.
And now the formal remarks. You see President Joe Biden, Jill Biden, his wife, the Vice President, rather, Joe Biden, on the edge of the dais.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And we will hear the national anthems.
Followed by the national anthem of the United States.
This is the anthem of the Holy See. We're not hearing the words to it, but this is a relatively recent song, and it really shouldn't be understood as a national anthem. It's more an anthem of the Holy Father, talking about the city of Rome, of saints and martyrs, and the angelic pastor, the heir of the faith.
And there's a lot of controversy as we hear these national anthems being played, or non-national anthems, as my friend Monsignor pointed out. There is some controversy surrounding some of the ticketed individuals who were invited here to this welcoming ceremony. According to news, and this was released by the White House, there are a number of people, including Bishop Gene Robinson, who was the first openly gay Episcopal bishop, He's here. There is a former co-head of a transgender caucus of Dignity USA, a group of LGBT Catholics. Sister Simone Campbell, one of the organizers behind the so-called Nuns on the Bus campaign. So you have a lot of groups who have, frankly, tangled with the American bishops and have been defiant and at times obstacles to Catholic thought and the official teaching of the Church. Many of them have been invited today, and that rankled not a few bishops and individuals I've spoken to in the last few days.
There are 20,000 people out there, and there's always going to be people you don't agree with. I think that the feeling that many people felt is that these people were specifically invited to present opposition to doctrinal teachings of the Church.
To make a point?
Yeah, to make a point and to create controversy. You know, people have been talking about on the news for the last 3 days about these people who were invited. All eyes are on it. I doubt any of them will actually be in the receiving line to meet the Holy Father, but it's the White House making its point on.
But this administration, I think we have to say fairly, without being partisan, has been very aggressive in pushing right up as far as it possibly can to every possible challenge to Catholic doctrine that it disputes. So to me, it's not surprising that these people were explicitly invited, and I hope, I mean, we're seeing great respect offered to the Holy Father right at the moment in this reception, and we'll see it even more when they begin their formal discourses, but I hope we won't see some attempt to highlight in images and through the way people are arranged in a receiving line some things that could be quite awkward for the Vatican.
And it's also something that happens when people write to the Secretary of State to ask for a picture of the Pope or some papal blessing, is that they're not always governed about who receives them. Then someone receives them who's in a position contrary to the Church, and they hold up, look, I was blessed by the Pope on this. You know, I got a papal blessing from a little souvenir shop around the Vatican.
We hope the blessing has its good effect when it comes to something like that. Actually, I'm very happy because my sister and brother-in-law are on the lawn this morning. Very pleased they're there.
And this is the south lawn of the White House, the fife and drum corps and all the flags in full array, welcoming the Holy Father, Pope Francis, to his first major event here in Washington. There's the fife and drum corps. We'll let you enjoy some of this. And this is his first time on U.S. soil ever in his 78 years.
We sure have a beautiful day for it too, though. You know, the temperature is perfectly mild, the sun's out, gorgeous scene on the White House lawn.
There's Ken Hackett, the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican, in the lower right side of your screen. He might be lost behind the lower third there, the graphic. It really is a beautiful setting, and the staging of this is spectacular.
Seeing these colonial era band and procession, it reminds us of how America was built on religious liberty as a foundational principle, and an expression of that is the respect given to the Pope when he comes to the United States.
The Pope seems to be enjoying it. And now the Pope will take a seat, and the President's prepared remarks, the official welcome of the Holy Father. President Barack Obama. This is EWTN News Live, continuing coverage of Pope Francis in the United States. The second movement of the longest trip of his pontificate. First we saw him in Cuba, and now in Washington, D.C. Little Yankee Doodle Dandy there. And from our vantage point, I can't tell what the holdup is, but there's...
Yeah, it sounded like that they were ready to let him begin. Here we go.
Good morning.
It is a beautiful morning.
Yeah, 20,000 people out on that lawn. They're excited. They've waited many, many hours. Many of these people went on the grounds at 4 a.m. for this.
Holy Father, on behalf of Michelle and myself, welcome to the White House. I should explain that our backyard is not typically this crowded. But the size and the spirit of today's gathering is just a small reflection of the deep devotion of some 70 million American Catholics. It reflects as well the way that your message of love and hope has inspired so many people across our nation and around the world. So on behalf of the American people, it is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the United States of America. Today we mark many firsts. Your Holiness, you've been celebrated as the first Pope from the Americas. This is your first visit to the United States. And you are also the first pontiff to share an encyclical through a Twitter account. Holy Father, your visit not only allows us, in some small way, to reciprocate the extraordinary hospitality that you extended to me at the Vatican last year, it also reveals how much all Americans, from every background and every faith, value the role that the Catholic Church plays in strengthening America. From my time working in impoverished neighborhoods with the Catholic Church in Chicago, to my travels as president, I have seen firsthand how every single day Catholic communities, priests, nuns, laity are feeding the hungry, healing the sick, sheltering the homeless, educating our children, and fortifying the faith that sustains so many. And what is true in America is true around the world. From the busy streets of Buenos Aires to the remote villages in Kenya, Catholic organizations serve the poor, minister to prisoners, build schools, build homes, operate orphanages and hospitals. And just as the Church has stood with those struggling to break the chains of poverty, the Church so often has given voice and hope to those seeking to break the chains of violence and oppression. And yet I believe the excitement around your visit, Holy Father, must be attributed not only to your role as Pope, but to your unique qualities as a person. In your humility, your embrace of simplicity, in the gentleness of your words, in the generosity of your spirit, we see a living example of Jesus' teachings, a leader whose moral authority comes not just through words, but also through deeds. You call on all of us, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, to put the least of these at the center of our concerns. You remind us that in the eyes of God, our measure as individuals and our measure as a society is not determined by wealth or power or station or celebrity, but by how well we hew to Scripture's call to lift up the poor and the marginalized. To stand up for justice and against inequality, and to ensure that every human being is able to live in dignity because we are all made in the image of God. You remind us that the Lord's most powerful message is mercy. And that means welcoming the stranger with empathy and a truly open heart. From the refugee who flees war-torn lands to the immigrant who leaves home in search of a better life. It means showing compassion and love for the marginalized and the outcast, to those who've suffered and those who've caused suffering and seek redemption. You remind us of the costs of war, particularly on the powerless and defenseless, and urge us toward the imperative of peace. Holy Father, we are grateful for your invaluable support of our new beginning with the Cuban people, which holds out the promise of better relations between our countries, greater cooperation across our hemisphere, and a better life for the Cuban people. We thank you for your passionate voice against the deadly conflicts that ravage the lives of so many men, women, and children, and your call for nations to resist the sirens of war and resolve disputes through diplomacy. You remind us that people are only truly free when they can practice their faith freely. Here in the United States, we cherish religious liberty. It was the basis for so much of what brought us together. And here in the United States, we cherish our religious liberty, but around the world at this very moment, children of God, including Christians, are targeted and even killed because of their faith. Believers are prevented from gathering at their places of worship. The faithful are imprisoned, and churches are destroyed. So we stand with you in defense of religious freedom and interfaith dialogue, knowing that people everywhere must be able to live out their faith free from fear and free from intimidation. And Holy Father, you remind us that we have a sacred obligation to protect our planet, God's magnificent gift to us. We support your call to all world leaders to support the communities most vulnerable to changing climate and to come together to preserve our precious world for future generations. Your Holiness, in your words and deeds, you set a profound moral example. And in these gentle but firm reminders of our obligations to God and to one another, you are shaking us out of our complacency. All of us may at times experience discomfort, contemplate the distance between how we lead our daily lives and what we know to be true, what we know to be right. But I believe such discomfort is a blessing, for it points to something better. You shake our conscience from slumber. You call on us to rejoice in good news and give us confidence that we can come together in humility and service and pursue a world that is more loving, more just, and more free. Here at home and around the world, may our generation heed your call to never remain on the sidelines of this march of living hope. For that great gift of hope, Holy Father, we thank you and welcome you with joy and gratitude to the United States of America.
White House, President Obama making some remarks about religious liberty, immigration, the restored relations with Cuba, and now a rousing welcome from the crowd for Pope Francis, who makes his way to the podium. Robert Royal, Father Jerry Murray, and we are joined by Anita McBride, who was Laura Bush's chief of staff and organized the last papal visit here. Now Pope Francis.
Mr. President, I'm deeply grateful for your welcome in the name of the all Americans. As the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country, which was largely built by such families. I look forward to these days of encounter and dialogue, in which I hope to listen to and share many of the hopes and dreams of the American people. During my visit, I will have the honor of addressing Congress, where I hope, as a brother of this country, to offer words of encouragement to those called to guide the nation's political future in fidelity to its founding principles. I will also travel to Philadelphia for the 8th World Meeting of Families to celebrate and support the institutions of marriage and the family at this a critical moment in the history of our civilization. Mr. President, together with their fellow citizens, American Catholics are committed to building a society which is truly tolerant and inclusive, to safeguarding the rights of individuals and communities, and to rejecting every form of injustice, discrimination. with countless other people of goodwill, they are likewise concerned that efforts to build a just and wisely ordered society respect their deepest concerns and the right to religious liberty. That freedom remains one of America's most precious possessions. And as my brothers, the United States bishops have reminded us, all are called to be vigilant, precisely as good citizens, to preserve and defend that freedom from everything that would threaten or compromise it. Mr. President, I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution. Accepting the urgency, it seems clear to me also that climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation. When it comes to the care of our common home, we are living at a critical moment of history. We still have time to make the change needed to bring about a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. Such change demands on our part a serious and responsible recognition not only of the kind of the world we may be leaving to our children, but also to the millions of people living under a system which has overlooked them. Our common home has been part of this group of the excluded, which cries out to heaven and which today powerfully strikes our homes, our cities, our societies. To use a telling phrase of the Reverend Martin Luther King, we can say that we have defaulted on a promissory note, and now is the time to honor it. We know by faith that the Creator does not abandon us. He never forsakes His loving plan or repents of having created us. Humanity has the ability to work together in building our common home. As Christians, inspired by this certainty, we wish to commit ourselves to the conscious and responsible care of our common home. Mr. President, the efforts which were recently made to mend broken relationships and to open new doors to cooperation within our human family represent positive steps along the path of reconciliation, justice, and freedom. I would like all men and women of goodwill in this great nation to support the efforts of the international community to protect the vulnerable in our world and to stimulate integral and inclusive models of development. So that our brothers and sisters everywhere may know the blessings of peace and prosperity which God wills for all His children. Mr. President, once again, I thank you for your welcome. And I look forward to these days, your country. God bless America.
Ladies and gentlemen, the St. Augustine Gospel Choir from Washington, D.C.
This is the welcoming ceremony for Pope Francis, coming to you live from the White House. EWTN News continuing coverage. We will have full analysis of this chock-full first statement by Pope Francis, opening with aligning himself with the cause of immigration and the desires of immigrants seeking a better life. He made his way forward to talk about unjust discrimination, climate change. We will now let you listen to the choir, the St. Augustine Choir. This is the honor guard, and then the president and the Pope will retire to a private meeting about a half hour in length. And then that much anticipated parade around the ellipse will be in the Pope. Will be a lot of excitement out there. I know people who are already in place have been there really since last night. Some of these people have been camped out. And there you see Pope Francis, President Barack Obama making their way inside to their private meeting. In the background, John Kerry, the Secretary of State, the First Lady, Vice President Joe Biden, and others. Following the meeting, they will likely come out to the Truman balcony.
They are going up there now. They'll go through the diplomatic reception room, probably take the elevator to the state floor and out to the Blue Room.
Anita McBride is with me, who organized Pope Benedict's visit and the welcoming ceremony, which many of us remember so fondly. What are you seeing here? What's going through your mind as you watch this?
Well, one of the first things that I noted when the ceremony started is that it was late by about 10 minutes. Now that's fine. I mean, because obviously you're waiting for your guest, and Pope Francis greeted all the children who are waiting to see him as well. So it really showed that he's in control of this day to a certain extent. But the ceremony, of course, that we're watching today is steeped in a great deal of tradition and protocol. We haven't broken with any of that. Some of the little touches that you'll see were same things that Mrs. Bush did, had yellow and white flowers placed around the Truman balcony and around the White House, a reflection and honor to the papal colors. But it is a beautiful ceremony. It's heartwarming, it is, and it's every leader, every foreign leader that comes to the White House is treated with great dignity and respect. This obviously has a different feel given the sheer size of the numbers of people that are on the lawn.
Well, yeah, it's 20,000 plus people. It's amazing.
It's apparently 15,000 is the number that they're saying. There were about 14,000 in the visit for Pope Benedict. At that date, it was the largest ever attendance on the South Lawn for a single event at a single time. Very different than the egg roll, of course, where you have tens of thousands of people coming throughout the day.
Right. That's one event that I don't need to do again. The egg roll. As you hear and as we see the reports of individuals invited who are at odds with the church, some of them really opponents of the Catholic Church. What do you make of those invitations? What is the White House trying to convey, and who would be handling that?
The White House is in complete control of the guest list and generally is for a foreign visit. I do know, though, in the visit of Pope Benedict, President Mrs. Bush dispatched me directly to meet with the Papal Nuncio, Archbishop Sambi at the time, who we miss so much, to actually talk about the planning of the ceremony, what music the Pope Benedict would like, who he might like invited. We conveyed to him those groups that we were going to include. Here we have them now on the Truman balcony. It's a really important image seen around the world.
The First Lady, President Obama, and Pope Francis waving from the balcony. And this is really the first view many of the people at the back of the South Lawn have of all three of them.
Absolutely.
He's pointing out the ellipse beyond the garden
where he will ride in a parade.
Yeah.
And this usually lasts just a few moments.
A little bit of a photo op, and then the Pope will retire inside. Now, Anita, where would they meet? Where would that private meeting take place? Where did it take place between President Bush and
Well,
Pope Benedict?
two different things took place with Pope Benedict. I mean, where you see them now retreating through the same doors into the Blue Room, there will be a group of guests there. At least we had, President Bush had members of his family that were Catholic. Columba Bush was there at the time. Their longtime housekeeper, Mexican immigrant, Catholic, met with the president. Members of the senior staff of President Bush's senior staff who are Catholic, who President Bush asked respectfully if Pope Benedict would greet them. And he did. He greeted everyone in a receiving line and gave us each a gift of rosaries. I remember it quite quite well. It was a very uplifting day. So there'll be a small meeting there. Remember, at the time we had Pope Benedict, it was his actual birthday.
That's right.
So Mrs. Bush had asked if it would be appropriate to have a birthday cake for him, that the pastry chef, of course, was very excited to make. And so we were up in the Blue Room, the state floor, for a bit longer than I think they will be this morning, so that we can have a small birthday private celebration. But at that moment, also, that Pope Benedict came to the Truman balcony, the crowd, erupted in a rendition of "Happy Birthday."
And we're showing some of that footage now of that that visit.
It was such an uplifting visit. Absolutely, every word conveyed by Pope Benedict on that day. And his arms outstretched to the United States. His arms were outstretched the minute he stepped off the Alitalia plane as well.
No, it was
when
a beautiful
he came
day.
in 2008.
I do want to unpack some of what we heard from Pope Francis, contrast it with Pope Benedict. Pope Benedict, as I recall, it was a sort of sweeping speech saluting the principles and the values of the United States.
Right.
And it was really a celebration of the faithful heart of America.
It was. It also was, which was unexpected, and what critics of the president expected to be absolutely opposite. One of the things Pope Benedict said almost immediately was a recognition and a respect for those who have died in the defense of freedom in our country, and that was a direct reflection of the sacrifices of our American military. And he talked about how all over our country are monuments to the fallen and those who have died in the defense of freedom. So it was a reflection and an understanding and a deep respect, I think, too, for what the founding principles of our country are, is sacrifice, in addition to our religious principles, which is, of course, to take care of the poor. That's our founding.
No, it was a moving day, as is this one.
It was.
I'd like to get into both the president's comments and then move on to what the Pope said. There was a lot here. First of all, the president began by saying, you're the first pontiff to share an encyclical through Twitter. It's a beautiful day the Lord has made. He mentioned here the role of the Catholic Church. He said, Americans from every background and of every faith value the role of the Catholic Church and the role it plays strengthening America. From my time working in impoverished neighborhoods with the Catholic Church in Chicago to my travels as a president, he was really connecting the personal story, as Barack Obama has done throughout his presidency, to the issue at hand, mainly welcoming the leader of the Catholic Church. Your thoughts on what we heard there?
Well, President Obama has repeated the story many times about his own. He always says, my first job was with the Catholic Church. And then he goes through all these wonderful social things that the church does. It's not an NGO, but it almost sounds like an NGO. Here's something that Francis has warned us against thinking. But we begin already to see a little bit of politicking creep in here. All Americans from every background and of every faith value the role that the Catholic Church plays in strengthening America. Well, American Catholics, I think, feel that has not really been the case lately. And the fact that the president is saying this perhaps betrays a little bit that he knows that there's a certain nervousness about this. Many, many Catholics in the United States, and I'm sure many of our viewers at home right now feel that that's precisely what's not happening in this country. And then later, when the president talks about religious liberty, about how important it is and how much we we cherish religious liberty in the United States, again, that's fine at a kind of an abstract level, but I think the Little Sisters of the Poor and the Hobby Lobby and some of the other cases the legal cases we've seen recently show that there's really a kind of a narrowing of the space for religious liberty, and it's not just Catholics, but many Americans feel that
the exercise of faith, not the freedom to worship, which the president sometimes uses that nomenclature, but the free exercise of religion, which is the constitutional principle.
But as we often say, that even in the Soviet Union, you had a right to walk into a church and say a prayer, or say a prayer in your home. There's something happening here that jars, I think, with this theme that the president tried to present of religious liberty, which really is one of our founding principles. Unlike Europe, our democracy is rooted in the inalienable rights that we receive from our Creator. Europeans tended to find their democratic liberties in opposition to the church. It's something that Benedict, I think, understood very well. And by the way, I think his referencing of those who have died for the sake of freedom, as a German who was a young man under Nazism, I think he remembers that America played a major role in defeating one of the most terrible regimes in modern history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, I was thinking as listening to the President's remarks precisely on religious liberty, that is the foundational liberty that this country exists on, and it continues to be such. When the President says that we stand with you in defense of religious freedom and interfaith dialogue, knowing that people everywhere must be able to live out their faith free from fear and intimidation. Well, right now, the U.S. bishops, various of them, have lawsuits against the federal government regarding the Obamacare abortifacient and contraceptive mandate. And the government will not cease to press their interpretation of the law on us. We have other religious liberty issues that are at heart. Words, not deeds, you know, that's what becomes the bane of human existence. I hope the President, as a parting gift to the Pope, said, well, we're going to let the Little Sisters of the Poor carry out their wonderful work, which the President praises. As regards the Pope's speech, I was very happy to see how he made reference to the nation's political future should be guided in fidelity to its founding principles. He said that right at the beginning of his speech. Something that we often don't think about. The founding principles of America are largely Christian. They're largely based on the right to practice religion freely, but also to have that civil society in which laws and customs are sweetened by the love of Christ, where Christian inspiration is so important.
Anita McBride, is there a danger of politicizing an event like this, a papal welcome, and sort of trying to force the Pope, if you will, into your personal endorsement machine? We heard the President mention immigration reform, the new relations with Cuba, which he attributes to the Pope, but in point of fact, Raul Castro and the Obama administration were already well down the track once the Pope was drafted in. Recent reports are now beginning to tell us. Your thoughts on that delicate balancing act?
Well, sure. I mean, I think, you know, when you have a leader of any country coming to the United States, presumably there's a lot of work that goes into what the discussions, what the bilateral discussions will be. This is very different, and there is a feeling of political expediency to use the Pope's visit to convey what are some unpopular decisions for the rest of us that we have to follow. I think, to Bob's point about Pope Benedict understanding the United States in such a deep way. I mean, he spent time here. You know, he was so integral into the Vatican II language, and really understood so much our founding principles and where we come from. And he had visited here, and I think, you know, Pope Benedict also comes from a very different experience and a different background with a different view of the United States. I have many relatives in Buenos Aires. I get it. You know, they lived under governments that are dictatorial, militaristic, and corrupt. It's not our experience where we have the ability.
And the view of the United States
is
would be what?
Different. The view of the United States would be one that is, you know, power hungry and rich and keeps it all for themselves.
That would be the Argentinian mindset.
Sure, and then, you know, when our relatives would come and visit us, you know, here, the life that they saw, which was very modest. I mean, we lived a very, you know, we're an immigrant family too. My family came from Italy to the United States. By the grace of God, my father came here, but his sister went to Buenos Aires. So, you know, her life was very difficult with her 5 children. Ours, you know, we had the benefits of the liberty of this country, the opportunity to bring yourself up from such poverty, and they really never did. But we were always, as Americans are all the time, whether it's your family or people you don't know, the first to rise up to help them.
Well, this is something interesting that Anita raises. We are dealing with a Pope who does come with that exclusive Argentinian experience, and unlike the last 2 popes who came here and had they had their own fix on the United States, which may not have been completely accurate, but they saw the United States as liberators of their own country, collaborators in bringing down a common foe, and by and large, they had traveled throughout the United States. John Paul through the Polish communities in Michigan, in Chicago. He traveled around a lot as a cardinal. Ditto for Cardinal Ratzinger. Pope Francis really hasn't had, this is his first exposure to the United States. Does that inform, is that informing some of what you heard today?
I think it does, and that's natural. We go on the basis of our experience. And when you're entering a country such as the United States that you have never visited, perhaps the image that's projected in the media in foreign countries is predominant. It's interesting, too, what Anita says, because the Argentinian, or let's say the Latin American perception is not monolithic, but in common it does look, you know, to the neighbor to the north with a little bit of suspicion and banking systems and corporations and whatnot. On the other hand, one thing the Pope's going to see here is the huge number of immigrants from Latin America who come to this country precisely because they love the freedom, the stability, the ability to earn money. You know, we know for a fact remittances, money sent by relatives here back to Latin America is very significant in the GDP of a number of countries, and it's all part of that family of the Western Hemisphere that's sometimes not appreciated. The American's not simply a cause of anxiety for people down south, it's a cause for prosperity.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I think in a way it's unfortunate that he's only going to be Washington, New York, and Philadelphia. I mean, these are great cities, and this corridor is a very important corridor.
Coming from New York,
Father Jerry is very upset that you're even saying this. Go ahead.
I love New York. But, you know, I mean, we know that this is the power corridor of the East Coast, and there's a lot more to America. I wrote a kind of a tongue-in-cheek column advising the Holy Father that we really kind of wish he could see a lot more of America, which is a big, open-hearted country, and he's a big, open-hearted person. And I think that he would resonate to that if he got away from our elites in the East here. But you know, he isn't going to be able to catch up on a life spent mostly in Argentina in just one trip.
Although he is going to Harlem and he is going to a prison, so he will have exposure, obviously, to a very different side of life that plagues our cities, of course.
He mentioned at the top that he was the son of an immigrant family. He's happy to be a guest in the country, which is largely built by such families. Now, you heard something that I am afraid we're going to hear throughout, where people rise up and where they're looking for the Pope to use the Pope to score political points rather than listening to things in context. Isn't that just a problem of being in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think, you know, when I saw that statement and heard him say that, I immediately thought of my own family. I was actually uplifted by that. Of a lot of things in here, that uplifted me the most because I'm a daughter of an immigrant family, and it was the church I went to, Holy Rosary Catholic Church, was built by the Italian. The cornerstone was laid in 1909 by the Italian immigrants who held on to their religion as the hope that got them through the difficulties and through the discrimination and everything that they were over time able to rise up against and make it. I'm a product of that. I worked in 3 presidential administrations in one generation where my father never went beyond the 3rd grade. That is what I saw in that statement. But you're right, it will be used by others in a very different way.
It becomes almost perverted in the context of Washington because this is a wonderful celebration. We're all children of immigrants. I mean, we are. That is the beauty of America. That doesn't mean that the Pope is endorsing any one model of immigration reform, which was clearly the adulation that we saw in that moment. That was the intention of that kind of celebration.
The Pope is entering into what I kind of think of as a magnetic field.
Yeah.
Because you could use a lot of these terms, a lot of these expressions, and in a different context in America, they would be taken as either commonplaces or not politicized. But when you say immigrants, which sounds like a left wing. I mean, I don't want to get into this left wing, right wing, but it sounds left. He told us he's not a lefty. When you talk about founding principles, it sounds more right. When you talk about tolerant and inclusive and unjust discrimination, well, who's in favor of exclusion or injustice? But in this magnetic field that he's stepped into, that sounds.
It takes on political import.
We can hear, you know, gay movements and transgendered and all sorts of things that are resonating. religious liberty is always a major theme in the United States. The talk about the environment is more explicitly, I think, part
Yeah,
of the
and let's talk about that for a moment. I mean, a
was
big
a lot of
chunk
the
of this,
speech.
I would say 2/3 of this speech is political and really focusing on air pollution, climate change, protecting our common home. He quotes Laudato Si. Now, again, Father Murray, paint the picture that the Pope is seeing when the context in which he sees the environment. It isn't in a vacuum. He sees it as protecting all of creation.
Yes, and we should say that human beings are a part of the ecology of creation, so we have to protect that part of the ecology, and he will speak, I'm sure, about protecting the unborn, the elderly, the fragile. He did that in Cuba. Yeah, the ecology movement that the Pope is endorsing is, again, something where prudential judgments enter in based on basic principles. The principles have to do with preserving nature, but we also have to remember God put us into the world to make use of created goods so that we might prosper and advance. So, you know, to cut down trees to build houses, that's part of human ecology so that people can survive. Now, questions that economists deal with and that the Pope himself, you know, has referred to in his encyclical, you know, how can you get away from fossil fuels without impoverishing a lot of the world? Things like that, that's not my role as a priest, but as an observer, I can say, you're entitled to, you know, say to the Pope, we agree with this, we agree with that, we don't agree with this or that, but let the people decide, let them in their free elections and all the rest come to the conclusions that they decide.
Robert, there was something at the end of near the end of the speech that I think we're going to hear much more of. The Pope has this notion of, and he's written about it, he's certainly spoken of it before his election to the papacy, that the North owes the South a great debt. And due to the environmental misuse and the pillaging of the South by the North, this is the worldview, that there is a debt owed. If you read this, I'm just going to reread this portion because as I heard it, it set off that bell. Our common home has been part of this group of the excluded, which cries out to heaven, in which today powerfully strikes our home, our cities, and our societies. To use a telling phrase of the Reverend Martin Luther King, we can say that we have defaulted on a promissory note, and now it is time to honor it. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know exactly what he's talking about there. Our common home, usually he's talking about the world in general and how we've polluted, and he says it's a garbage pile now. I think somewhat exaggeratedly. I don't know so much that he's talking about we owe something to the South at this particular point. I think that what he's just saying is that
we owe a debt to
the world,
the environment?
to nature. Remember, he says human beings forget, but nature never forgets in Laudato Si. My take on this was that we go back to those principles that Father Murray was talking about, that right back to Genesis, we were placed in the garden, and God says to us, be fruitful and multiply. Now, this is part of his message, that we need to have children, we need to welcome life, and have dominion over the earth, because we are the only creature that we know of who is made in the image and likeness of God that can actually choose good and evil. So we've chosen some evils, we've chosen some goods. In the course of the last century and more of development, we didn't know that industrialization could have a large effect on the planet. It's just not part of human history in the past. But as we began to see it, especially in the countries that are most developed, the environments became remarkably clean. We cleaned up our air, we cleaned up our water, our people are able to be housed and fed and to get education and travel and whatnot in a much less polluting fashion than in the past. There's a kind of a static view, it seems to me here, that you know, we've done all these bad things. Well, that was a transition point in human history. We're into a different model now, and even without accepting that large problem, that global problem of climate change, we've solved a number of difficulties, and we will continue to solve more because we're made in the image and likeness of God. We have intellects, we have creativity that comes to us from the Creator. And that's what really solves problems.
Yeah.
I like that point, actually, if I could say that Bob made, that, when we look to our religious leaders to give us hope and to give us inspiration, and we follow them, and I do wish the Pope had alluded to the fact that, in the United States, we are leaders in all of these efforts. We are leaders in conservation and the environmental movement. And of course, we could do more, we could do better. But to harness that energy and creativity that is in some ways so uniquely ours and use it for the rest of the world, that's the message I would have liked to have heard.
Yeah, well, look, I think this, for so many looking in, for so many people I saw today, this is an exciting moment. They've taken children out of school. People are there. They want to see the Pope. They want to see the leader of the faith. They want to see, then there are a chunk of people, and I have to say this is not an insignificant number. I bumped into them in the train station. I've seen them in makeup rooms. There is kind of a secular sheen that the Pope has, that he's, for Catholics, he's the Roman Pontiff, he's the Pope, he's Peter. For so much of the world, he's Popera. He's kind of a celebrity. They don't quite understand the religious aspect of it. They just see the kind of avuncular, happy uncle type who's really trying to be nice to everybody and give everybody a shot and lift up all people and remove injustices. And as I heard today on a news report, he's no longer interested, this is a loose quote, he's no longer interested in policing doctrine, but in spreading goodness and hope. Which kind of made me laugh.
Okay, well,
so I'll let you answer all of that.
Let's go back to what we're talking about.
Sure.
The successor of Peter is on the White House lawn addressing the American nation and the world. Is religion an unimportant reality in this country? Absolutely not.
No.
Are less people going to church these days? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think in divine providence, the Pope is here and he's calling America back to what it needs to do. Worship the Lord, care for your brother and sister, take care of the sick and the poor, all of that good stuff. Yeah. The American government has a different view on religious liberty. The president expressed what he did. The Pope is here to say, look, organized religion has produced great benefits. Let us keep doing it. Let us do it in freedom. That's a founding principle of this country.
I'm thinking of Mother Teresa, as you said that, who I interviewed many times and knew a little bit, and she hated when anyone would dare describe what she did as social work.
Right.
And in the context, even in the president's comments, he was the community organizer, he worked for the church. There is that kind of social worky feel around it. That's not really what impels the saints. It wasn't what drove Mother Teresa. In fact, she would say, I'm serving Jesus in the disguise of the poor, the distressing disguise of the poor.
Whatever you do to the least of these, you did it unto me.
Yeah.
That's kind of biblical.
Is that right? But the point is, without a vibrant, living faith that includes doctrines and beliefs that have to be expounded, you don't get to the overflow of that faith, which is caring for your brother and sister, worrying about the environment, worrying about the immigrant. You also don't have the time, the understanding to extend yourself in those ways without that spiritual reservoir. Part of what the Pope is going to call people to this week
What
Father
was saying earlier about human ecology, which is, by the way, kind of a technical term in the writings of Francis. And he draws from Benedict and from John Paul II. This is what John Paul II called a proper theological anthropology. Right. Unless we understand human beings as something more than smart animals, and unless we understand creation as something more than energy and matter kind of swirling around, well, we don't arrive at values. And so if we're not back at Genesis with God creating the world, and we don't regard human life from beginning to end as uniquely made in God's image and likeness, then we're missing the main thing. So that human ecology, which includes our relationship to creation, that's the Catholic vision. And it can only come out, as he said on the plane coming in last night, if he recites the creed and for people who have that in their backgrounds.
We're getting some emails, and I want to encourage your emails. I know many of you have questions, you have comments about what you've seen. What did you make of the Pope's opening address? We'd love to hear from you. Tweet me at Raymond Arroyo, or you can send us an email, papalvisit@EWTN.com. This is from Mary. Why do you think the Pope started talking about the environment and corporations? What about the mess our country's in? What about abortion and infanticide and gay marriage?
Well, He made reference to going to Philadelphia to the 8th World Congress
Right,
on
to the World Meeting
Families,
of
and
Families.
will be speaking on
Now,
marriage.
Anita, tell us what we're
Yep.
seeing here, the Pope and the
Okay.
President making their way out
They're
of the
coming
White House.
down the colonnade. They've just come through the residence, obviously the private meeting that was upstairs on the state floor, and now they're walking through the colonnade by the Rose Garden. So the press pool will be there and you know, taking pictures that will be seen around the world, and they make the short walk to the Oval Office where they will have their private meeting, which I understand is one-on-one only. Which President Bush did have one-on-one, but Mrs. Bush had joined, and Pope Benedict and President and Mrs. Bush prayed in the Oval Office.
Now you can hear all the shutters going
Yes,
off as
because
they
the press
take the
is
slow
there
walk
in the
here.
Rose Garden. You'll probably get a shot of that, too. This is the walk, of course, you know, the president makes every day from home to work.
This is a one-on-one meeting, but you'll notice there's a translator behind
There, of
the
course,
Pope, who will
always,
likely be
that's right, that's
the
right.
translator, because the Pope's English is not,
Yeah.
by his own admission,
Right.
he in fact, on the plane,
He just started practicing
he
it,
said,
right?
it is difficult for me, he said, speaking in English. English is not my strong point.
Right.
So they're about to
saying-
enter the Oval Office here. And I think they're stalling so that the
Right.
photographers can
get
some images.
photos. I'm sure there is someone from the protocol office or the president's advance office right in front there, sort of giving them direction that we can't see on camera as to when to move and when to step.
Oh, there they are. You
So
can see
there
the
they are.
press
They're right
out
at the
in
top of the
garden.
Rose Garden. They're going to hold here. Probably do photos here as well, right at the steps.
And then they'll get the entry into the Oval Office.
Correct. There they go. And this is a perfect day.
Beautiful
to
day.
have this. You know, you pray for we prayed very hard for a day like this.
This is a good time to come to Washington.
It's a beautiful time to visit. Absolutely. So
They
now
just
they're
entered
going,
the Oval Office. We're getting, again, more emails. We'll encourage them. We're here to answer your questions, trying to bring clarity. This is complex. It's hard at times to unravel. What's going on? Who's this man in white? What did that mean? The protocol can at times get in the way of the understanding of what's actually happening. Sherry writes, I'm listening to President Obama's welcoming speech to Pope Francis. He seems to have a deep understanding, appreciation, and respect for the Church and her teachings and the dignity of human life and religious freedom. How can he continue to support abortion and coerce Catholic organizations to pay for those? I simply don't understand how he can reconcile his words with his actions.
Come to Washington. We'll explain that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the Democratic Party seems to be so wedded to this abortion regime that we have.
Which is classical, we should say. Classically, this was a Catholic party.
Oh, yeah, I grew up in a Democratic, ethnic Catholic household. I never met a Republican until I was at the university. I knew that they existed somewhere out
on
there.
the peripheries.
But I think that this is something that we have to recognize, that the parties are so deeply committed to certain constituencies in this country that someone was just complaining to me, who was organizing a debate the other day about the Pope coming, that Richard Trumka, the head of the Teamsters Union, who is a Catholic and grew up in that same kind of democratic Catholic ethnic background, is deeply committed to Planned Parenthood, which makes no sense. I mean, he's deeply committed to that part of Catholic social teaching that lifts up the workers and tries to seek justice in society and equality and fairness. But there's some partisan blindness when it comes to recognizing the rights, the justice toward protecting that life in the womb. And then throughout I think we're going to more and more see throughout the whole arc of life till old age.
We have an email from someone. This is from Lloyd, and they're writing it. It seems they're almost writing to the Pope himself. They say the visit to the U.S. is appreciated. We hope you will learn during your papacy that even with some of the U.S. drawbacks and what you consider terrible aspects of capitalism, the American people have been and are always ready to help those in need. Compare figures to most socialist countries. It's fine to make a point of the problem of the poor and disadvantaged, but you should not forget the people and the organizations that contribute to them. Please give credit to the families that have a father at the head of the household. This is a big problem today.
That's one of the things I think the Pope has seen already and will see more of, the generosity of American Catholics. You know, the culture in America of giving, of bequests, of donations, is something that really doesn't exist to the same extent either in Europe or in other parts of the world. Latin America has been victimized by dictatorships and horrible economic policies. You know, in our country, when somebody comes from nothing and makes hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not uncommon to see them give large sums of money. We just had somebody involved in capital formation in New York gave $40 million to the Archdiocese of New York for Catholic schools, which are destined for minority and poor children. That's the kind of spirit America expresses. It's not always appreciated because people like to say the CIA, the federal government, the banks, the corporations. That's not the reality here, without impugning any of those organizations. The reality is, as a nation, we're primarily a religious people and we're a generous people. I think the Pope will see that.
And I think that extends, if I can add to that, you know, and so many of those schools that are kept open now, thankfully, are educating children who are non-Catholic.
Yeah.
That is not the criteria to be educated in those schools. And I think there was a very interesting article, if any of you had seen it, this week, that former ambassador to the Holy See, Jim Nicholson, and Newt Gingrich wrote together about the upcoming visit of the Pope. And there were just a couple of things going to this point that that you made about Americans and their prosperity and how they use it, and which I would just like to refer to, because you know, our form of government was an experiment. It was an experiment, still an experiment. And yes, we have benefited from the explosion of prosperity, but we've not clung greedily to that wealth. We've shared that prosperity with the rest of the world, both through direct aid, which we do as a government, as a generous and compassionate government, but also through the investment of individuals, like you're speaking about, Father, who have helped to keep badly needed schools open.
And the church's role in all of this. Catholic Relief Services, when Haiti has an earthquake, when there's a tsunami, millions and millions of dollars flow out through the generosity of Catholics in the United States and non-Catholics who use, they realize the funds will be well used and they will go to their intended purpose. There is that great contribution, and I think we'll see that in the days ahead. I mean, you talked about the Pope's visit to Harlem. He'll also visit a Catholic charities here in Washington. He'll feed the homeless. So we'll see that kind of living charity in action. And that is a big part of the lived experience of Catholicism and the vibrancy of faith that I hope we get a chance to see. There were a few emails that were objecting, you know, why are you politicizing what the Pope? Well, let me back up. Let me push you back a little bit. We're not politicizing anything. The comments this morning, frankly, I'm just going to be blunt because that's what we do here. I was taken aback by the overt sort of policy prescriptions that were in both of these talks, including the Pope's. I mean, they were very pointed. The spirituality was kind of diminished. It was not really present except at the very beginning and the end. Most of it was about climate change, reducing air pollution, paying a debt back to the environment. There was a little point, no doubt. We know by faith the Creator does not abandon us. He never forsakes His loving plan and the plan He's created for us. But there was a very pointed, deliberate message here, and we can't pretend. We're not engaging in fantasy land here. We're here to report what's happening. And if I sat here and kind of gave you pious dissertations on the one line in a 3-page speech, I'm doing you a disservice. And frankly, the media at large engages in this sort of thing. And I'm going to decode again for you. The reason you're seeing this kind of worshipful coverage of the Pope is because people imagine he's moving in a political direction that many of those who are shaping the coverage agree with. That's what's happening. I'm just laying that out. The other part of this, I think, is because I've never seen a Pope covered so unquestioningly in certain secular quarters as I have in the last few days of this particular visit. And I think it's because, and there may be a big surprise in store for some people, but I think it's because they imagine the Pope is, going to become the whip at for the Democratic Party when he hits Capitol Hill. I don't think that's going to happen.
It's also, if the Pope had called me, as he does to people at times, and one of the things I think I would have told him about America is this affirmation of active participation in civic life is great. But it's what we Americans do pretty much instinctively. We're a very active, practical kind of people. One of the greatest things that the church has done for America is its spiritual formation of citizens. You know, our system of freedom is dependent, as John Adams said, on a moral and a religious people, because otherwise freedom becomes liberty, liberty becomes license, and the next thing you know, you have this individualist society that doesn't care for anyone. It's that spiritual formation, that moral formation and that spiritual formation that lie at the heart of American-style liberty. And that's something the American Catholic Church has contributed to mightily.
There's apparently some frozen video of the Oval Office. The video's not moving, right? Is that correct? Okay. So we will take you there as soon as we can. Frozen video is not what we do. We like moving video.
You like action.
Yeah. Oh, we have it. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, we don't have it. We
Okay.
have it. We don't.
Whatever
have it.
we have,
This
we
is
have.
like this is like
There
a
it
Cole
is.
Porter song.
There it is, right there.
Yeah, there's the frozen shot of it, so you can kind of see the what's happening in there. Anita, this is the spray.
This is right. The pool comes in. They have a few seconds, as you know, to grab some photos. And then the White House will release really the bulk of what they want, because they'll take as many photos as they want from many different angles. I do remember, actually, the President Bush's photographer, Eric Draper, being on a scaffold to be able to take a photo from the top of the ceiling down, and particularly while they were praying.
Oh, really? Oh, there was they prayed together.
President Bush and Mrs. Bush and Pope Benedict in the Oval Office.
Great, great. We are going to take a little break, and we will return with our coverage. The next stop, the Pope is going to make a round about the ellipse. There are thousands of people waiting there for him. They have been since the wee hours to get their glimpse. This is an unticketed event. It's the only unticketed event here in D.C. So you can imagine what that scene looks like. We will bring it to you live. And a little later, the Pope will meet with his bishops at St. Matthew's Cathedral here in D.C. Our live coverage continues. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.